Future MD Summer Program third session today. We're so excited to have everyone. We'll be started in just a couple minutes. So it's called. Feel free to make sure your mic is mute. Your mic is on mute, and mic is on mute. And if you are comfortable with having your camera on, that would be awesome.
I'll wait just a couple more minutes, but I'll just start sharing my slides.
Yes, let us know if that works. If you have access to that, feel free to go ahead and share. Perfect. Thank you.
You can see that okay?
Yep, that is perfect.
Cool.
Hi, everyone. Again, welcome to the third session of our Future MDs summer program, Future MDs in STEM summer program. We're so excited to have you. Today, we are joined by amazing Miss Campos, and she will be talking about her journey to medical school, as well as how she crafted her application to stand out as an international student. So feel free to make sure your mic is on mute whenever the speaker is presenting, as well as ensure that you keep all questions to the end, just so we have it's called our speaker can get through her presentation on time, and she'll definitely have time towards the end of the session to answer any questions. Okay, thank you so much for joining, and we'll get started. I'll hand over the mic to you.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Very excited to talk to everyone, and thank you everybody for joining too. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, crafting a medical school application in general and what are the important things to highlight. And then I'm going to use just my own experience to kind of illustrate those different points. And since that's the only experience I've had is my own, but of course, there's not just one way to do this. There are several ways, and I'll try to hit on different points that are more broad rather than just specific to my story in general. So I'll start just by introducing myself, and I'll talk about these different things for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then at the end we can dive into a Q&A, and then have a little bit more dialogue and chat for 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to start first by introducing myself and talking to you a little bit about who I am and why I'm here talking to you today. My name is Gabby. I was born and raised in Brazil, and I'm on an F1 status now in the US. So I'm not American. So I can talk a little bit more about visa issues and stuff. But I did my undergrad. So I moved to the US when I was 18, and I did my undergrad at Brown University, where I studied cognitive neuroscience. And this is a picture of me at my graduation in 2019. I stuck around at Brown, and they have a 5th-year master's program where you can start your master's the 4th year of your undergrad, and then go to grad school for just 1 year and get a master's. I did a master's in psychology. I graduated in 2020. Obviously, my graduation from that did not look like this picture. I was at home with my family, so it wasn't the same thing, but it was a very good experience nonetheless. And then now I am a 4th-year medical student at Yale University. I will be matching, hopefully, into psychiatry in March of 2024. And, I don't know where that will be, but hopefully it will be a program that I'm very excited about. But that's sort of where I am academically, and what my path has been in that regard. In terms of just other things that I'm involved in, I'm one of the executive directors of F1 Doctors, which is an organization that is focused on helping international students craft their path in medicine. And we provide one-on-one mentoring, and we have a lot of events that are focused on being on an F1 or J1 status in the US and being a in a pre-professional program into medicine. And we also have some dentistry students as well. So, just a plug for that work that we do. We have several, hundreds of mentors that are dedicated to helping international students. And that's our logo right there. But then I also want to talk about, who I really am. So that's just my, the academic side of my journey. But as all of you are as well, we are much more than just that. And I want to highlight, especially, in your journey into medicine and building a career as a physician, the people that are around you are extremely important as well. I had a meeting with my academic advisor in school just last week, and she was, we were crafting stuff for residency applications, and we were talking, and she said something that really stuck with me, which was that the people in your life are going to share you with medicine a lot, since it's such a demanding career and it demands a lot of time and attention and dedication. So it's important that you cherish them, and you give them the time of day, and you prioritize the people in your life, because they're very much a big part of this journey. So I put some pictures of my classmates that are in my medical school class, and some of their significant others. This is my dog, Nino, who's somehow also a part of my journey. This is my wonderful partner, who's also a big part of my journey and has been a rock throughout all of this. And then also my family, who, they're the original cheerleaders who have been cheering me on since I was a little kid and have supported me through so much of this. So don't underestimate the role of the people around you in this journey. And, you're going to learn so much from your interactions and your experiences with these people that you will never learn in a classroom, and you will never learn in medical school. Learning how to be with others and interact with the people around you and have these experiences is very important to a career in medicine and to relating with your patients. So love the people around you. So that's just my little spiel for, having healthy relationships in your life. But aside from that, I'm going to get into the roadmap and the stuff that we're going to talk about today, and then we can get right into it. So I'm going to be talking again for 30 to 40 minutes. We're going to start with chatting about the choices that you make when you're an undergrad, and the different paths that you can take in that area, and then the things that you can do outside of the classroom, both as extracurricular activities and research, and then how to take that and create the story of you that you're going to be presenting to admissions committees, and then synthesizing that story and your activities into your personal statement, which is how you will be presenting yourself to medical schools when you first apply. And then we can get into the Q&A bit of it, and then I'll answer some questions, and we can have more of like a chat. And I'll wait till the end for that, because I want to make sure that I get through everything. So let's start first with the choices that you have when you're an undergrad. So something that's very important to be mindful of is, as soon as you decide that you want to go to medical school, and I know that for a lot of people that happens before you even arrive at university. If you're going to the university in the US, you're going to need to have the pre-med requirements done throughout your undergraduate career. And I've put a table here with what those requirements are. And I've based this off of my undergraduate school's pre-professional website, and it is updated. And so this is kind of like, these are general requirements, and every school is a little bit different, but these are the general requirements that they recommend that everybody do, because most of schools will be, their requirements will be satisfied by this list. And as you can see, like, this is plenty of time. Like, for chemistry, this is like 2.5 years of college, or 2.5 years worth of semesters that you're going to be studying chemistry. So you want to be able to fit those into your schedule, and kind of, sketch out your schedule for the rest of college, and make sure that where you want to fit these things early on will be better than if you're trying to catch up later on. But if you go into pre-med later on, there are also other options like a post-bac and stuff like that, you don't have to start your freshman year. But if you do start your freshman year, this is something to keep in mind. And I have a link here, which I will send in the chat when we're in the Q&A bit, which it's from MSAR, and it has every medical school program in the US, and it has what the requirements are for each program. So I'll send that in the chat at the end. If you're doing undergraduate in the United States, choose a major that is based on your interests. So I came to the US for college, partly because, I had the opportunity to, it was an excellent opportunity, but also because they give you the liberty to pick your major. And you don't have to study biology if you want to be a doctor. So as long as you can fit your pre-med requirements into whatever major that you choose, you should be good to go. I had a mentee last week that was telling me about her passion being history, and she loved history, and she wasn't sure if she should, also double major in biochem. But she actually had all this super interesting research with the head of the history department, and that also brings so much color into your application, and things that you're passionate about will always serve you well in the long run. So don't put out those passions if you're able to do both. A little note also about GPA trajectories. I've had mentees come to me and be like, I totally bombed my inorganic chemistry class, and I don't know, should I just not apply to medical school? Is that going to really compromise my my ability to get into a medical school program? And something that's very important to keep in mind here, that medical schools in the US really look to, is making sure that you can show an upward trajectory in your GPA. So if you, let's say, you just moved to the US, or, you just moved to college from your parents' home, it doesn't have to be from another country, and you are having a very difficult time adjusting to living at university, and your first 2 semesters of chemistry, you weren't, it wasn't your priority, wasn't to succeed in chemistry, it was just to, be well altogether. That's okay. Medical schools like to see that maybe you've gotten better in chemistry over time, or even if there was a class that you particularly struggled with, and you were very, you're very in touch with what are the harder parts of that class. Maybe you could try to be a TA in that class that you didn't do so well in, talk to your professor and be like, well, now I've grown, I've learned this, and I've done this and this and that. And that will show schools that even though you didn't do well in that class, you actually did learn the material, you actually took the time to dedicate more time to something that you had difficulty with. That's one way about that. Schools, if you do poorly in your freshman year and then you start doing better over the years, schools like to see that more than having, everything absolutely stellar and then kind of just dropping everything in your last semester. They like to see your journey. Another note that's important that I wish I had known when I was applying was that it's important to fit your MCAT well into your studies. So you'll be applying to medical school from around early June to December, the year before you start medical school. You want to have your MCAT done by April or May of that year that you're applying. So, April or May, you'll be in school. So think about where you want to fit your MCAT and where you have time to study. So maybe you want to do that the summer before. And, that's what I did. I took the summer. I mean, I had a job, and then when I would come home from my job, I would study for the MCAT. And I did that the summer before I applied, which is 8 months before you start applying. But it's important to keep that in mind because it is, it does give you some constraints if you take your MCAT too late. You might have to wait an extra year and think about what you'd want to do in a gap year, things like that. And of course, I encourage people to take gap years, but if that's not in your plans, this is something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that you'll want to have taken most of your pre-med requirements before you do the MCAT, because that's the material that's going to be on the MCAT. So having had that in the classroom is a good base for studying for the MCAT. beforehand. And then another thing that's important for medical school applications is thinking about your extracurriculars. So medical schools are very mindful of the things that you've done outside of the classroom as well. And some things that I want to emphasize for extracurriculars are, quality over quantity. You don't want to do just a bunch of activities that you don't really dedicate your time to, just to show that you've had some sort of experience with things. You want to spend time doing your activities. It's better to do something for 3 years than to do something that you go to twice a week for like a couple of months. You want to show that, maybe you've had leadership positions in these activities. You've worked with the same team for a lot of time. In medicine, you're always going to be working with teams, especially in medical school and residency, maybe not so much when you're in attending, depending on how you choose to have your practice, but teamwork is going to be really central to your time as you start building the foundation of your career. And it's important also to show to schools that you can, work in a team, that you can be a leader, even a leader within peers. Sometimes you'll have, in an extracurricular activity, you'll have peers that are older than you that you will be the leader of. Those are important dynamics to think about, because they will be relevant in medicine as well. And then you want to be able to build meaningful projects that you can talk about and that you're passionate about, just for your own fulfillment, but also because that's what's going to make an activity stand out. Like, you did this, yes, but what did you learn? What did you create through this? And then just a note between clinical and non-clinical opportunities. It's important to think about what the motivations from medical schools are to request these of us. So a lot of people are like, well, I don't think I have that many clinical opportunities, many clinical experiences in my extracurriculars. Like, what do I do? And I think it's important to think about the point of why medical schools want you to have clinical experience. And I think it stems from the fact that admissions committees want to see that you've tried medicine out, you've tried something medicine adjacent out, and you liked it. And you're not just going into medicine because you think you're going to like it. They don't want to, when they admit you to medical school, they're betting on you on staying in medicine and going through the program and, matching well, because that also is good for them, and etc. So they want to know that you actually are committed to this, that this is something that you've tried, you've liked, and you want to commit to. So that's why it's important to have some clinical extracurriculars in there. And then just a note on finding those opportunities. As a international student, you have to be thinking about the fact that you want these opportunities to be volunteer opportunities as well. And then just, for non-international and international students, when you're looking for these opportunities, a good place to look would be if there is a medical school associated with your university, or if there is a medical school close by to where you go to school. Look for their resident clinics, look for their student-led clinics, or any free clinics in your town where you're going to school. They usually need volunteers to help run their model, and you will be able to, be around patients. Even if you're just, being a volunteer at the front desk, you have some exposure to healthcare, and that's what medical schools want to see. So certainly, that's a good place to look for opportunities. Something else that I like to mention is that when you're picking your opportunities, pick things where you think that you will be, enacting change that's important to you. And by that, I mean, you're dedicating yourself to a cause that you're passionate about. So if you're doing something like, after school teaching, or, working with recycling, like I worked at Planned Parenthood. I volunteered at Planned Parenthood when I was an undergrad, and that was something that was very meaningful to me. I was passionate about furthering their mission and providing care to their patients. And that gave me a lot to talk about. That made that opportunity all the more fruitful. And I think that's something that's important to keep in mind when you're picking your extracurriculars, is to pick something that is important to you and their mission aligns with your values. And again, be mindful of your visa status. You're not allowed to perform a job where somebody else in your same position would be being paid. So it has to be a true volunteer position. It can't be a paid position that you're doing as a volunteer, just legally speaking. So be very mindful of that. If you want to get around that and you want to do something clinical where you're being paid, I would encourage you to go home and do stuff at home. So my first year of my first year of undergrad, I went home and I worked at a lab in Brazil. So, I was being paid there. And if you want to make some money over the summer, that you can't be paid by a hospital in the US. And then remember to have fun with your extracurricular activities. Like, you're going to be working so hard in college. The pre-med classes are not easy. Pick things that are fun. Like, for example, I was part of this this Brazilian music group when I was in college, and it was a really fun activity. I learned so much. I learned so much about leadership and being with people, and then also it was very fun. So, and these people are my very good friends. So be mindful of that as well, that you are a person that deserves to have a good time too. All right, and then now getting more into research as well, how to approach getting started in your research career if you're just starting your research career. First of all, you want to pick an area of interest for you. This is a picture of me with my mentor and a picture of me at my lab that I worked in throughout undergrad. My area of interest was sleep, because inherently very interesting. And luckily there was a Sleep for Science program at Brown that was very interesting, and I love the work that they were doing. But I chose to work in something that I was passionate in. And then aside from that, you want to look at your area of study that you're passionate about, and you want to choose a research format that you're interested in learning more about and that you won't get too tired of. So you do not need to work in a wet lab to get into medical school. Some people want to work in a wet lab and they want to learn, they like to do like PCR or, doing like other genetic analyses or doing like chemistry research. People want to work in that sort of environment. That's great. You should pick to work in that sort of environment. If that's not the environment you like, that's not your only option. You can do qualitative research, so with human subjects and maybe like interviews. You can do biostats research where you're, building mathematical models and you're not interacting with people at all in terms of like your subjects, and you're not interacting with like tissues or bugs, or, if you don't want to do that type of work, you can be more on the computer. And you can do human subjects research, which is what I did, where I was at the sleep lab and we had people come in and do polysomnographies, and we were working overnight, and it was super fun. And then something that I also want to highlight is that you want to choose a mentor wisely, and please don't underestimate the importance of choosing a good mentor. Your mentor is going to be a huge advocate for you in your journey. Pick people that you work well with, and pick people that you truly vibe with, because and to do that, you can talk to past trainees that have worked with this mentor. Before you start your work with your mentor, sit down and have a conversation about, I put down on the slide publication possibility. That does not need to be your end goal. You do not need to be a published author to get into medical school. I only had one abstract poster presentation as all of my publications when I got into medical school. But it's important that you have shared goals with your PI. So if your PI really wants you to publish and you really want to publish, that's perfect. If you really want to learn PCR, but your PI actually wants you to be doing something else in the lab, that your goals aren't aligned, it's going to be hard to work together. So make sure that you have aligned goals, or if you don't have aligned goals, a sort of compromise between both of your goals, so you can both get the most out of this opportunity. ask around in the lab, like, what is the importance and support given to trainees of different levels? Is the PI only spending time with the doctorate students, or are you going to get one-on-one time between you and your PI? If you're thinking about, I'm going to be working here for a few years, this is going to be the bulk of my research experience, how am I going to, maybe get a letter of rec from this person? I don't meet with them one-on-one very often. So you want to make sure that the PI is somebody who gives the time of days to their younger trainees, so the undergrads. And again, don't underestimate the importance of a good mentor. This is going to sound like I'm backtracking on what I said earlier, but if there's something of research that's really, really cool, but the mentor is not good, versus some research that is okay, you could get into it. It's not your favorite, but it's okay. But the mentor is very dedicated to the student, is very dedicated to trainees. You're going to want to pick that one, because that person is going to be your advocate throughout your journey, and they're going to be important in your time. So this is my undergraduate mentor. Her name is Dr. Karskaden. She's helped me through a lot of different things, and she's helped me through my journey in a really big way, and she's lovely. And I just went to go visit her a couple of weeks ago, and she's somebody that I cherish in my life. And these are the people that worked with me my first summer working at this lab, which was after my sophomore year of college. And don't underestimate the relationships that you make in research as well. Like these are, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but Logan and Leslie are the ones in the corner here, and they're in medical school now. And Leslie's applying to OBGYN, and I connected her with some of my preceptors in OBGYN at Yale. She goes to U Chicago. And these relationships, they'll continue for the rest of your life. And maybe you're the undergrad that was pipetting next to you in your lab will help you get an interview at the program that you want. And it's not to see people in an opportunistic way, but just don't underestimate these relationships that you're going to forge in these places. So then we get into like synthesizing all of that into your personal narrative. And I put this quote here. I'm going to read it. And it's something to really think about. And it sounds very like ethereal, but I promise you this is an important thing to internalize when you are gearing up for medical school. Don't choose your activities with a predetermined narrative in mind. Let the activities that you choose create your narrative. So don't think, because I'm a pre-medical student, I need to do X, Y, and Z. Do the things that you're interested in and let it drive you towards medicine. Mostly because, you first and foremost, you want to be authentic in the things that you do. These admissions officers are so good at their job, and their whole job is to kind of sniff out when people are being inauthentic and people are saying things that, they didn't really do or they aren't really passionate about. They can sense that very well, especially through interviews, but also through your essays. So it's important, to seek out things that make sense to you, because they will be able to sense that out. And then this is more, I am applying psychiatry, so this is the more like reflective bit of my proposal to you. But investigate your own motivations. Think about what has driven you to make your choices. Don't be alarmed if some of your choices seem to stray you away from medicine. Pursue those things if they are calling to you, because medicine is so many different things, and sometimes something that doesn't even seem like it's medicine will end up, enriching your path to becoming a physician. So for example, I had a mentee who I was speaking with. She's been my mentee for several years, and she's very environmentally conscious, and she loves recycling and is like really into like upcycling things. And she started a group at her university for recycling things and turning them into clothes. And it was like recycling for fashion. And from the start, that doesn't seem like it has anything to do with medicine. But she actually crafted her entire personal statement being about drawing the parallels between taking care of the earth and taking care of people, which is, the central tenet of medicine is taking care of other people. So even something that she was so drawn to, she was so passionate about, that didn't seem like it would connect in the end to medicine, did connect in the end to medicine, because medicine is so many things. And she did end up making face shields with during the pandemic with like recycled materials. So that's, that's like directly medicine. So don't be scared if your interests take you away from medicine. First of all, it's important to be a complete person that does different things, but also things might be medicine and you don't even realize it. And then in your applications, you will have a list of activities that you've done, and then you'll be able to pick 3 most meaningful activities that you'll write more about. And those will certainly come up in your interviews. So really reflect on, what is meaningful to you? Why are they meaningful to you? And then take the whole image of everything that you've done and the reflections that you've had about it, and think about what, in what directions has that set you, and how have these things shaped your path. Identify the different themes in your activities that you've done, because again, like the title of the slide is crafting a personal narrative. You want to take all of these different things that you've done and you want to make it into a story about yourself. Those are the most compelling applications, are the ones where there is a story that the applications officer or the admissions officer can follow, because it's very hard to piece together different things that don't seem related. But if you sit down and you take the time to understand how different things connect, then you'll be able to present an application that is easy to understand and the person can really get who you are. I see somebody raise their hand. I'm just gonna keep powering through. I just have a couple more slides and then I'll answer the question at the end. And then again, think about themes that join everything. And then just a little note about affirmative action. So as a lot of you know, a week and a half ago, I believe, they kind of did away with affirmative action. And so college and medical school and other professional school applications will be race blind. And the admissions officers will not be able to see any race information that you enter into your M.D.s or into your Common App or whatever application. And they also, this I'm not 100% sure of yet, but there's inklings that you will no longer submit a headshot for medical school application. So previously you need to submit a picture of yourself, and they will no longer be looking at those pictures, I guess in an effort to make applications more race blind. My note about this, and of course, like this is all developing right now, and it's brand new legislation, and people are, schools are kind of grappling with what to do. I'm not on the admissions committee at Yale, but I do have friends that are, and they've been going to meetings discussing, what does this mean? How do we act? But I do urge you, and this is my own personal advice, this is not, coming from university or anything. If race is something that has shaped your narrative, if race-based issues or racial themes or things that are important to what has made you become who you are and what makes you who you are, and what has been an important part of your story, do talk about it in your essays. Applications are not going to be screened based on race, but if you are telling a story that's important to you and really illustrates how you've come to where you are, and it involves race, definitely put that in your application. If that is something that is important to your story, don't keep that out of your application just because of this new legislation. Continue to put things that are important into your narrative. And then at the end of all of this, we synthesize all of these different experiences into your personal statement, which is what's going to be provided to schools and to admissions officers as how they're going to get to know you. It's in your primary application that everybody gets before you get your secondary applications sent back to you. So the personal statement, the prompt is use the space provided to explain why you want to go to medical school. And it gives you 5,300 characters, which is just about a page on Word. and it's completely vague. So it really gives you the space to be as expressive or as anecdotal as you want to be, or not. And you can do whatever you want with those characters. But I have some tips for that. And the first one is to really start with a hook that keeps the reader engaged in your story. Be flowery with your writing. That's all right, as long as you're getting your message across. The admissions officers read hundreds of essays every application cycle. And, even though the answer to this question might start with like, I really want to be a doctor because I like taking care of people. If you start off with that, the admissions committee officer will have read something along those lines hundreds of times. It's not going to bring them into your essay. So for example, I put in the beginning of my personal statement here, which was, after drying off and weighing the last bunch of grapes, I reached over the counter and placed them in a small cardboard bowl. I lifted the masking tape off of the face of my watch, 3:23 a.m., 2 minutes until mealtime 4. So when you read that, you're like, what is going on here? Like, I don't understand these grapes. It's the middle of the night. This is mealtime 4. What is mealtime 1, 2, 3? What is going on? So the admissions committee officer will be like, I want to understand what this is. And I know that nobody else wrote about the same thing because, this was about my job overnight at the sleep lab. So it kind of brings them in and makes them question, like, what's going on? I want to read more. And you want to have that reaction from admissions committee officers because they are humans. And when you pique their interest, they'll be more invested in what's going on. Another thing that's important is that I know that especially a lot of international students that are applying from abroad, but also, international students applying from here that have gotten jobs after college, you've probably written a few cover letters. And although a personal statement serves the same purpose of a cover letter, it's not a cover letter in the way that you won't just be telling your admissions officers all of your great qualities. Like 80% of applicants to medical school, at least, I made that number up, but at least will be talking about how they are empathetic and how they're dedicated to service in their essays. Those are great. Those are important characteristics for a doctor. But once you read hundreds of those, how are you going to set your empathy and your dedication to service apart from everybody else? You're going to want to put it in a story. Anecdotes will really be your friend in writing your personal statement. You want to illustrate your message because people remember stories much better than they remember loose pieces of information. So if you illustrate something through a story, you're much more likely to make a bigger impact in the admissions committee's mind. So something to keep in mind. Tell stories more than you just spill facts, because that will serve you well. And then again, the thing that I was talking about in the previous slide about using overarching themes, identify those themes in your story through your reflection about the paths that you've taken, and take a theme that kind of wraps around your whole essay, and kind of illustrates the thread that your personal narrative follows, because that will really help close off the personal statement in a way where it's like, this is the theme, these are what's being illustrated. It's a good way to like compartmentalize it so that admissions officers remember you and have you as mindful, like, okay, I get it. This is the person that's very dedicated to this, and these are their characteristics, and they told me that through these stories. So you really want to have that, make it easy for your admissions officers to understand what you're saying and who you are. And then something really important to do too is to consult other readers. Show your essay to other people that you trust and ask them, what did you get from this? What did you learn about me through this? And make sure that the point that you're trying to get across is what they're understanding from your essay. If you think that there's something that is too personal in your essay that you don't want to share with other people, be very mindful that whatever that you put in your personal statement is fair game for interviews. So if there's something that you don't feel comfortable talking about even if it is very important to your narrative, don't put it in your essay if it's not something that you'd be willing to talk about with an interviewer. And I know that this seems like, again, I'm backtracking on what I've said of putting things that are important to you in your essay. But if you're going to be uncomfortable and it's going to throw you off during your interview to be asked about something, don't include it in your essay, because everything in your essay is fair game to discuss in your interview and throughout the application process. So that's just something to keep in mind. But definitely share your essay with other people, let people see what you've written and ask them what they're getting out of it. Take their feedback, take it with a grain of salt, because it is your essay at the end of the day. But ask people that you trust, that you think are good writers. Take advantage of the any writing programs at your university. Anyone, your friends who are English majors, take advantage of that if they're people you trust. And make sure that a lot of people see your essay. Your first draft might look nothing like the final thing, but you need to start somewhere. So, start writing, think about things that are important to you. And then that kind of concludes everything. I know I'm being mindful of the time. We have about 18 minutes. So I want to go into the Q&A bit, and I've seen some people raise their hands throughout. But just before we do that, here's my information. That's my name, my email. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. I'm happy to meet with people. This is the F1 Doctors Instagram and the website. Be mindful that the website is f1doctor.com, and you can find mentors through there. You can find me through there. And if a lot of people reach out, I'm happy to connect you with mentors through F1 Doctors as well.
Thank you so much, Ms. Campos. We're definitely going to send all these links out in the Slack afterwards about F1 Doctors and their program. So feel free to, look for that message after today's meeting. A little tradition that we have is for all our amazing guest speakers, we like to do a little round of applause, a Zoom round of applause. So if everyone wants to go to the reaction tabs and give Ms. Campos a round of applause for her amazing work, that would be perfect. Then we'll get started with questions as well. And I'll enable the chat for everyone to use as well. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll head to the question sections of the presentation. Thank you so much again.
All right, I guess. Do you want to call on people? Whoever has their hands up. I don't know who had their hands up first or.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. Sammy has their hand up based on what I see right now on the participant section. So Sammy, feel free to ask a question.
Hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay. I have two questions. First one is, what's the difference between medical school and medicine university?
Can you ask that again? Let me turn up my volume. The difference between medical school and what?
Medicine university.
Okay, so when you're so in the US, the thing that you do is pre-med. So you'll go different from every other place in the world, I assume, is that you'll go to undergraduate first, where you'll study something that is not medicine. And then following that, you apply into medical school. So it's a different study. So you do 4 years of your bachelor's degree, and then you do 4 years of medical school after. So you don't apply when you're 18 directly into medical school. So that's the difference. So this is more focused on the transition between undergrad and medical school and how to prepare the application for that.
Okay, the second one is, what is your track in medical field?
One more time. What about medical school?
Your track in medical field, especially.
Oh, I'm gonna do psychiatry.
Thanks.
Of course. Thank you for asking
Sounds
questions.
good. I'll answer one question in the chat that someone sent out. Lujan, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the name wrong, but they said that they don't understand the concept of themes. Can you list out 2 examples of what a theme can be in a medical school application?
So one theme can be, for example, dedication to service. So you're very dedicated to people who you feel have been underserved in medicine, for example. And so you've done several activities where you're trying to help people expand their access to medicine. That can be a theme. And then another theme can be leadership. So you think it's important to, be a leader within your community. So you've dedicated some of your activities to becoming a leader. Those are just an example of some themes.
Awesome. The next person that has their hand raised is Sarah.
I'm truly curious about how long did it take from you to finish your whole personal statement and your essays?
So I started my personal statements in April, being mindful that I was sending my applications in June. So it was my last year of university, so my classes weren't as demanding that last semester. So I had a lot of time to dedicate it and send it to other people. And then the thing with you write your personal statement and then you send it with your primary application, and schools receive that. And then most schools will send you a secondary application, and that's when you'll write your secondary essays, which are essays that are more focused on, like, they'll have themes like, why would you want to come to this school specifically? And these are school specific. So those essays, so you'll send out your personal statement. I started mine in April. I sent it out the beginning of June. You want to send it out as soon as you can when applications open. And then you'll start getting your secondaries around July and August. And by the end of August, you'll be done writing your secondary essays and sending them to the universities. That's it. That's about the time.
Thank you.
The next question I see in the chat is someone is asking, does getting like a master's degree increase or decrease the opportunity of finding a good match within medical school? I believe that is the question. So maybe talk about your journey, about why you chose to get a master's and how it played a part in your whole application.
I think certainly getting extra higher education degrees above undergrad is going to give you an advantage in your applications, because it's shown that you've dedicated yourself to academics and you have an area that you are more of an expert in. I chose to do my master's because it really made sense with where I was. I had the opportunity to stay an extra year in university and finish up my master's. So it kind of makes sense that to do a 2-year program, I could fast track it and just finish in 1. But I also was very passionate about the research that I was doing at the time, and I wanted to continue that research. So it gave me the opportunity to continue it at the graduate school level and, write another thesis and focus more on my research. And that gave me a lot of stuff to talk about in my interviews. And I do think having an extra degree sets you apart because, medical school is a graduate program in the US. It's not an undergraduate program. So doing another graduate program shows schools that you're kind of ready to learn at that level. So I if it's possible, I do recommend it.
Perfect, thank you. I think the next person is Marwan. Feel free to unmute and ask your questions. Marwan, I don't think we can hear you. Feel free to put your question in the chat. We'll move on to the next person. Ahmed Mustafa.
Okay, is my voice clear?
Yep, I can hear
Yes.
you.
Okay, I really appreciate sharing with us this knowledge. And my question is, I wanted at first to study medicine, and when I knew about that you have to first be undergraduate, not after high school, so I want to go medical informatics. So can I when I apply to medical informatics and take the MCAT and applying to medicine. Can I work with medical informatics until I finish my medical school study?
Yes, but
Okay.
you probably like you need to be able to budget that time. I don't know if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have the time to do both.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, in medical school, they, you have a whole year of where you're doing clinical stuff in the hospital. So basically you'll be in the hospital all day. Um, so it's hard to be able to do both. But if you're able to, and you can, also it's important to keep in mind that if you come to the US and you're F1 visa, you can't make money in the US unless you're being paid by the university where you're going to school. So you'd have to do either work through the university or work outside of the US remotely. Those are the two options.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course.
The next question in the chat is by Nuran, and they ask, can I get my undergrad degree in my home country and not in the US and then take the MCAT and apply to medical school?
Yes, you can. You can apply to medical school from outside of the US. Of course, you need to take the MCAT and you need to make sure that you can prove that you have the equivalent pre-med requirements as medical schools are asking for. So that in your undergrad, you did take the 5 semesters of chemistry or whatever. But if you're in your home country, you studied medicine and you finished a medical school program in your home country, you can apply to residency directly in the US. You don't have to go to medical school again. You can do residency in the US and you apply as something that's called an IMG, which is an international medical graduate. So if you already have your medical degree from your home country, sometimes it helps to look for a research position in the US and spend some time doing research here, and then applying to medical school from there, from that research position, and then you can match directly into residency. So you don't need to do medical school if you've already become a doctor in your home country. You just apply as an IMG.
Thank you. That's really useful information to know. The next person that has their hand raised is Amar Ahmed.
Hi, is my voice clear?
Yeah, I can hear you.
First, I want to thank you a lot for sharing this useful information with us. My question is, how can I improve my English writing in personal statement? And also, does it important to make activities related to medicine field or not?
Yeah, so I think in terms of improving writing for the personal statement, something that's really helpful is looking up examples online and mimicking the language that they use. I think that's one really important way. And some way that you can take advantage of resources that are online is you look up like Harvard pre-medical office examples of personal statements. And sometimes those are just online, and those are materials that Harvard students are getting for help with writing their personal statements. And you can mimic some of that language. Of course, don't copy something that you see on the internet. They'll be able to see that, but just you can use some tips and tricks of how they use the language in those essays to write your own. And what was the other part of the question? Oh, the activities. So you want to have some activities that are medical. A really good thing about being an international student is that it's very hard to get into a hospital in the US. They ask for hundreds of things and it's hard to even apply to be a volunteer. But oftentimes in our home countries, it's a little bit easier to, have some time in the operating room or have some time, following patients with a doctor. So definitely take advantage. Like your activities don't have to be just medical whatsoever, but if you have some, it does help you a lot to have some exposure to medicine. So if you can find ways to shadow or to watch clinical things in your home country, that'll definitely be to your advantage.
Thanks a lot.
Of course.
Moving on, thank you. The next question I see is, hi, can I know whether research is a really important part of your portfolio? Is it a must-have?
Yeah, so research is not necessarily a must-have. You know, it's quite possible to apply to medical school without research, but it is very, very helpful, and I highly recommend having research as part of your resume and part of your activities when you apply. I think this also comes, you know, they want to know that their students are able to think in a research way, and it doesn't even have to be biomedical research. It can be any sort of research that you do. Medical schools want to know that their students can have a framework for thinking about research, because that will also serve you in your residency applications, and they are mindful of who, you know, will also be successful in residency applications. And also, I think medical schools want students that can do research at the medical school, because that's one of their incentives for taking us, is having people that are going to work in research under the name of the university. So I do highly recommend it. It's not, you don't have to be successful in research. You don't have to have like a first author publication or even a publication at all, but just be involved in research to some capacity. And it doesn't have to be in the US, just in general. Will definitely give you a better application.
Sounds good. Thank you. We're gonna wrap up for the last few couple of questions. Mohammed, feel free to unmute your mic and ask a question.
Hello, is my voice clear?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, first, I thank you for this great session. My question is, how can I prove my medical experience to the university I apply to?
To prove that you've had medical experience, is that what you mean?
Yes,
So you just mention that in your application. So if you have an activity that you've done that has given you medical experience, let's say, like, I'll say, just for illustrating my argument, that you shadow or you volunteered at a clinic at home. You helped out in a clinic and you've had medical experience through there. They give you, I believe it's 15 slots. So you have 15 spots where you can write an activity that you've done and explain it. So you can explain, I worked in this clinic and I have medical experience because I, you know, saw patients and really learned how to take vitals and do a medical intake, whatever. So you'll report to them your experience, and they trust that you're not lying, and you sign a lot of agreements saying that you're not lying.
okay, thanks for the answer.
Sounds good. We'll end it off with the last question. Does the prestige of your medical school matter in the long term?
That's actually a very good question. In the long term, I mean, what matters most is that you match into residency, and that you're able to study, you're able to complete a program and become board certified as a doctor. Then you'll become a doctor. At the end of the day, like, you can be hired by anyone if you have that medical license after being in residency. But the prestige part comes into it when you're proving yourself to residencies. And I don't by any means think that this is fair, but there is an edge of, like, the prestige of the medical school coming into the fact that the people in residency will make more assumptions about you, more good assumptions about you, when they're reviewing your application. So they will be like, well, this student went to this school, so certainly, you know, I trust them a little bit more. And even if it's subconscious, I think it comes in there. But at the end of the day, for creating your career, even though it makes it a little bit easier to match to certain programs, you'll become a board certified physician at the end of residency regardless. And every board certification is worth exactly the same. So that's my convoluted answer to that.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we do have like a lot more questions coming in. So is it okay if we redirect you to we redirect our participants to your email if they have any like other questions?
Yeah, definitely reach
Okay.
out to me by email. I'll do my best to answer all of the emails. Maybe I'll take a little bit, but
Yeah.
I'll certainly
Again,
do my best.
yes, sounds good. We'll put Ms. Campus's email in the Slack as well as F1 Doctors. So if you want to find more resources about the International Student Medical School process, feel free to connect with that organization. Ms. Campus, we're so thankful to have you today, and it was really informing presentation. We learned a lot, and we really appreciate having you and hosting you today.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time. This was lovely.
Thank you. Yes. Have a great day. Yes. All righty. Great. Okay. So we'll transition into the next. Oh, we'll do a poll first before we transition into the next part of our workshop. So the poll has been sent out. We'll have it open for a little bit, so feel free to answer that question. And if you can't see it, please reach out to us on Slack. That will be the best way to contact us about issues. Then, with no further ado, our founder, Davina, is going to be hosting a workshop today. So I'll hand over the mic to her.
Okay, amazing. So I just released the attendance poll. Again, it's okay if you get the question wrong, it's just for participation. And if you have any like concerns about the poll, or if you don't see it, it's not showing up for you, please direct message me on Slack. I can't respond right now, but I will respond after the session, and then everything will be fine. So feel free to keep answering the attendance poll. I'll leave it up for a couple more minutes, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. So today we're going to be learning a little bit more about the science behind the nervous system and the cardiovascular system. So we're going to be digging a little bit deeper into the anatomy and physiology. We're also going to be talking about some research methods and techniques, some diseases and disorders, and some fun things like that. All right, so to get started, our nervous system is so critically important. It's responsible for our sensory perceptions of the world around us, mental activities. It's helping us stimulate muscle movements. So even the fact that I'm talking right now and I can move my hands, I can see all of you and I'm perceiving that correctly, it's all thanks to my nervous system. It's also responsible for gland secretions and hormone regulation. It really helps us balance a lot. So does anybody know what the components are of the nervous system? Feel free to type it in the chat, or if your hand is raised, I can see them and I can call on you. Amar Ahmed, did you want to answer?
I have a problem with the poll. I can't see it.
If you have a problem with the poll, just DM me on Slack.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Abdul Rahman, did you want to answer the question?
Yes, I think I know the components of the nervous system, which is begin with the membrane in the cranial bones and spinal cord, and other nerves, which is branch into the limbs and whole of the body.
Yeah, excellent. So you basically got everything that I had here. So it's your brain and your
Thank you.
spinal cord and your peripheral nerves. And it's also consistent of your sensory receptors too. So great job. And I'm sure everyone else had their hand up was thinking the same thing. So this is a diagram that kind of shows you the overall nervous system. You can see your brain right here. And then you have your spinal cord that travels down. And then you have all of your peripheral nerves that extend out into your body. So does anybody know why is our nervous system so important? What does it actually do? I know I mentioned some of the functions, but what actually makes it so important? You can type it in the chat too. I'll make sure I keep my chat open so I can see people if they're responding. Sammy, did you want to answer?
Yes. It's important for us. It's make move in body,
Sorry.
and if there are any risk situation, it can make a sense for it.
Yeah, it makes sense out of the world around us, right? There's so many things that we are perceiving, so many sensory stimuli, and our brain helps make sense of everything, which is really awesome because it can handle a lot of information at once. Farah, did you want to add on to that?
It is basically what differentiates us of non-living things.
It's basically what?
What differentiates us from non-living things.
It's definitely one of the important things that differentiates us from non-living things for sure. Yeah. Radwa, did you want to add something else before I move on?
The nervous system. We can't live with this because nervous system is make the heart work, make our organs work, organ system. We can't live without it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just
Yeah, so our brain is responsible and our nervous system is responsible for coordinating a lot of activities with our other organ systems too. So great job, everybody. I'm seeing lots of great answers in the chat as well. Controlling our systems and how we perceive sensations. Yes, exactly. That's perfect. Guiding everyday activities like waking up. That's awesome. Kenzie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's like the control room of the whole body, like the movie Inside Out. It helps us control our emotions, everything we feel, the core memories, and everything.
Perfect. Yes. So everything everybody's saying is awesome. You're all right. Our human brain contains nearly 86 billion neurons. Our nervous system is helping hold us together. It relays so many messages about how we feel and we move, we speak, and we make decisions. And a lot of this is controlled by this concept of neural circuits. So neural circuits are essentially neurons communicating with one another or communicating with different cells in the body to relay really important information about all of these things. And another really, really interesting thing about the brain is that it's highly plastic. Does anybody know what I mean when I say the brain is highly plastic? Do you think I mean that our brain is made out of plastic, or is it something else? Ezra?
I think
plastic.
that means when something wrong happens to it, we can fix it.
Yeah, you're definitely on the right track. It's this concept of like if something goes wrong or if something's missing, maybe we can find a workaround. That's definitely a great start. Abdulrahman, did you want to add anything else?
Yes, I want to say that plastic is the opposite of elastic, which means that it's hard. Plastic means that if it get hit or it won't be hard it won't be hard greatly.
Yeah, so everyone's got a great idea about this. Some things that we see in everyday neuroplasticity are, when we create something new or when we share something new, like when we make new art or make new music, we're essentially changing our brain. Our brain is very experience dependent. So the way that we perceive the world and the sensory input that we get from our outside world and what we choose to do changes how we experience other things. So it's really interesting how our brain has this ability to kind of change itself based on how we experience the world. And these are some really cool ways that we can experience neuroplasticity in our everyday lives. Like when you're learning something new, figuring out how to use your new school laptop or figuring out how to get to your new school. And plasticity is also really, really critical in early childhood development. There are certain periods called critical periods where it's really necessary for young children to experience some sort of sensory stimuli, like visual stimuli or colors or sound, to make sure that their brains are developing within a normal timeline. Yeah, so these are just some other functions of the nervous system. We've already covered a lot of these. What we haven't mentioned so far is thermal regulation. So your body temperature, communication with our other body systems, reflexes are also so important and autonomic, controlled by our spinal cord. And it's just helping so many parts of our body communicate with one another. So does anybody know what the difference is between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system? I'm going to be looking at the chat and you can also raise your hand. Yes, Sarah?
Well, mainly the central nervous system contains the brain, or includes the brain and the spinal cord, and these two send signals to the motor nerves, or they what control the whole body. But the peripheral nervous system includes the other nerves, which transmits the signals from other body parts to the central nervous system. So the central nervous system is what in control.
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it. So we kind of think of our central nervous system as this integration center. Oh, and here's a little diagram showing you the difference between the central nervous system and the peripheral one. So your central nervous system is kind of seen as this integration center. It's making all the decisions and it's sending out all the signals, kind of making those choices. And your peripheral nervous system is kind of gathering information about from your sensory receptors and bringing it back into your central nervous system so that we can make decisions about it. Or in the case of things like reflexes, sometimes it doesn't even reach our cognition. Again, your CNS, brain, spinal cord, we've already mentioned this. Your peripheral nervous system, your cranial nerves, your spinal nerves, it carries messages to and from your spinal cord in the brain. I'm seeing lots of great things in the chat too about the differences. Everyone's doing a great job. This is just kind of more detail about the differences between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So we see with our peripheral nervous system, which is carrying messages to and from your central nervous system, that can kind of be broken into your somatic nervous system, which is kind of voluntary muscle. So you see me moving my hands right now. I'm choosing to do that. It's all voluntary muscle action. It's controlled by my somatic nervous system. But my autonomic nervous system is a little bit different. It's controlling involuntary body functions. So when we see the sympathetic nervous system, when you think of fight or flight, like when you are in an anxious situation and you can kind of feel that spike of adrenaline, that's your sympathetic nervous system letting you know that, hey, we're in fight or flight. It's your body's way of protecting you, making you, kind of get ready to fight. And then your parasympathetic nervous system is kind of calming your body. It's known as the rest and digest nervous system. It's kind of conserving and maintaining your energy. Yeah, I see a great question in the chat. What if you have maybe a psychiatric disorder, or if you are more anxious than what is considered to be like the normal baseline for like being anxious? And some theories have suggested that it could potentially be due to overactivity of your sympathetic nervous system. That's definitely not the only thing, but that could be part of it. All right, so now we'll be talking about different lobes of the brain. So can anybody tell me what one of the lobes of the brain is? We can start with this blue one right at the front. So when I say front, I hope you can see my cursor. What I mean is just the farthest away from this red one here. So I'll call on you, Sarah.
It's the frontal lobe.
Perfect. Yes, it's the frontal lobe. Does anyone want to tell me what the pink lobe is? And I'm seeing frontal lobe in the chat. Good job. Omar, did you want to tell me what that one was?
Motor cortex?
Really close. It's really close to the motor cortex, honestly. It's actually your parietal lobe.
Parietal, yeah.
But you were really close. Abdul Rahman, did you want to give me the yellow lobe?
Temporary cortex, right? Or loop?
Yeah, our temporal lobes, exactly. And then Amani, did you want to give me the green one?
Occipital lobe.
Perfect. Yes. Does anybody know what the brain region highlighted in red is?
Cerebellum?
Yeah, cerebellum, exactly. Great job, everyone. You're experts on neuroanatomy.
But I have a question.
Sure.
Where are exactly the motor cortex and sensory cortex?
Yes, so we're actually going to talk about that in just a few slides. So hang on one second.
Okay.
Yes, but great questions, great questions. So here, our frontal lobe contains our primary motor cortex. It's where we have our integration center for speech, emotion, memory, higher cognitive skills, and many aspects of our personality are controlled by our frontal lobe or involve our frontal lobe very heavily. So our parietal lobe, which we have here in yellow, contains our somatosensory cortex. I'm not sure if you've ever seen the motor homunculus. You can Google it. It's a funny looking thing, but it kind of depicts how the human body would look if it were dictated by how many nerves we have there. And it integrates sensory signals from our skin. It also helps us process different aspects of taste. And then in pink, we have our temporal lobe. So that's where your primary auditory cortex is. And then your occipital lobe in blue is where your primary visual cortex is. So when you get information about colors and shapes, it's processed there. So now we'll be talking about cells that transmit electrical signals, which are neurons. So these are some of the cells of the nervous system. We have our neurons, they're excitable. And then we have glia, or cells that support neurons. Does anybody know, are neurons more commonly found or are glia more commonly found? Which one is in more abundance? Yes, Sarah?
The glial cells are much more abundant. We can say there's a ratio of 10 to 1 for glial cells to neurons.
Yeah, glial cells are definitely more abundant than neurons. So now we'll be talking about some of the different glial cells. So the concept of a glial cell is that it's a cell that's going to support the neuron. So astrocytes are a kind of glial cell. They're the most abundant kind of glial cell. They're highly branched and they're found in the CNS. They help cover the capillaries. What do they help form? What are the astrocytes pretty heavily involved in helping maintain and helping form? Does anybody know? This one is a little bit trickier, so don't worry if you're unsure. Yes, Sarah?
Well, I know that they supply the neurons with the need of like nutrition or something. They just connect them to the capillaries.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yes, they do help provide them with nutrients. Kenzie, did you want to add anything on?
Yeah, their main function is regulating the blood flow, sorry, and also building like the bonds with neurotransmitters for the metabolism of the body.
Yeah, that's definitely another important thing that they do. Abdul Rahman, did you want to add on?
I was just want to ask you, the astrocytes is the type of glial cells, right?
Yeah, they're a type of glial cell.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so you all had some great ideas, but actually what we were looking for was that our astrocytes help form our blood-brain barrier. And I actually want to take a second and actually talk about what our blood-brain barrier actually is and why it's so important. So it's made up of really tightly packed endothelial cells lining the blood vessels. And what they do is they're kind of like a security guard. They restrict what can enter the brain because our brain is very tightly regulated. And if any particles that aren't supposed to be there enter the brain, that could be really harmful. This is really important. It helps protect our brain. But the downside is it prevents most drugs that are delivered by our typical methods of receiving drugs, like patches, injections, or pills, from entering and being able to serve their purpose. So scientists have kind of found a workaround, and they use really, really small hydrophobic molecules that can actually enter the barrier, and they sneak drugs into those tiny molecules so that way they can pass. And if somebody needs treatment via drugs for nervous system related diseases or disorders, then they can use that kind of method. Another kind of glia, microglia, they're really small spiny cells. You can see them here in orange, and they're phagocytes. We also have ependymal cells. They're cells that line the CSF-filled cavities. Anybody know what CSF stands for? Amani?
Cerebrospinal fluid.
Perfect, yes. So CSF is our cerebrospinal fluid. It's really important. It's what our brain is resting in, and it's filled with lots of nutrients that's keeping our brain healthy. It's an awesome job. All right, so our last two glial cells that we'll talk about are oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells. So oligodendrocytes help myelinate axons in which part of the body? There's a difference between them and Schwann cells. They also myelinate axons, but in a different part of the body. Does anybody know what the difference is? And again, no worries if not. Okay, so oligodendrocytes actually myelinate axons. Oh, Mama, could you want to answer?
Yeah, I guess the first 1%.
Yeah, so it myelinates axons in the CNS or our central nervous system, and then our Schwann cells are helping myelinate axons in the peripheral nervous system.
It also helps to make it faster, like to transfer the message faster by the axons
Yeah,
from
exactly.
the presynaptic to the postsynaptic.
Yes, of course. So does anybody know what makes neurons unique, different from other kinds of cells in the body? Obviously, all the cells in our body are slightly different, or all the different kinds of cells are slightly different, but there are some things about neurons and nervous system cells that make them really unique. I'll call on Don.
I believe there's a the central neurons cannot regenerate.
Yes, exactly. So that's a really great point. You're born with all the neurons that you will ever have, and you go through this pruning process throughout life where you essentially, if you don't use these connections, they're pruned away and you lose them, but neurons do not, they don't undergo mitosis. So you're born with all your neurons. Great point to add. Shadi, did you want to answer?
I think it can't be regenerated.
Yes, definitely. That is true. Okay, I'll call in one more person, Omar.
Okay, what about if we said the myelin substance that are on the axon of the neuron?
Yeah, myelination is definitely something that we only see on neurons, so that would be right.
And that they transfers information from and to the brain and spinal cord.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
they are
Yes,
works like
definitely.
formation.
Perfect. Okay, I'll call on one more person, Kenzie.
Yeah, I believe because of the axons as they deliver electrical signals toward and from the central nervous system.
Yes, perfect. So all of you are kind of reaching the same idea, and I think you mentioned it as well. So before we answer this question, let's talk about the anatomy of a neuron. So this is what they look like. As you can see here, we have dendrites, which are these extensions of a neuron that receive information from other neurons and from other cells. We have the nucleus, like a lot of our other cells. Pop quiz, does anybody know what type of cells in our body do not have nuclei? Or they're enucleated? Don?
Is it erythrocytes?
Yeah, blood cells. Yes, red blood cells do not have nuclei. Good job. Okay, so we have our nucleus, we have our soma, which is just our cell body, and then we have this long projection here, which is our axon, and then we have our dendrite, or we have our axon terminal at the end, and our axon terminal is responsible for releasing neurotransmitters to then bind to another cell or another neuron to continue that flow of information. So I just wanted to go over the anatomy of a neuron before we talk about what makes them really unique. And what makes them really, really unique is that they're electrically excitable. That's the whole basis of how our neurons are able to communicate with one another and how we're able to relay so much information. It's because they're able to be electrically excited and generate an action potential and then communicate information via that action potential. So in order to understand what an action potential is, I kind of wanted to take us back to the basics of what a resting membrane potential actually is. So a resting membrane potential applies, the concept of this potential applies to any cell in the body. It's essentially just what is the voltage difference between the outside and the inside of a cell? And then what makes up that difference? How do we figure out what exactly the resting potential of a cell actually is? Well, there are a couple of different things that contribute to this potential. So it's the ions that the membrane is permeable to and what the membrane is not permeable to, as well as the ion channels that are present. So the more positively charged ions there are inside of the cell, the more positive the cell is relative to the outside, and the more positive that resting membrane potential is. For a neuron, a typical neuron, we see that our resting membrane potential is about -60 to -70 millivolts. So I put -65 here. And the reason that this happens is because at rest, we have these leak potassium channels open in our neurons. And these leak potassium channels are open regardless of whether or not the cell is depolarized. It's just always open at rest. So positively charged potassium ions are always leaving the cell. And because they're positively charged and because that positive charge is leaving, this makes our resting potential more negative because our positive ions are leaving. There are other ions that contribute to the resting membrane potential, such as sodium and chloride, but the cell isn't really permeable to them at rest. The positively charged sodium ions on the outside, they can't get in because those sodium channels, those voltage-gated sodium channels, they're closed until the cell is depolarized. So that's why our resting membrane potential is so negative and so close to the equilibrium potential of potassium. I know that's a lot of information. So if you have questions on this, hold on for a sec. And then why is this important? Why is the concept of this important? It's because it allows for the cell to become depolarized and then generate an action potential, like I mentioned earlier. So this is kind of a graph of an action potential. Think of this as just one neuron here. So what happens is, let's say a neuron is at rest, and then another neuron releases neurotransmitters that bind onto the dendrites of this neuron. And when they bind, that triggers a depolarization. So once threshold is reached, these sodium gates, then they open and all this positively charged sodium is rushing into the cell. So our cell is becoming super, super, super positive. Sometimes we reach 30 or 40 millivolts. And then we say that our cell is depolarized. And then once we reach this kind of max here, then the neuron's like, okay, I'm done. And then the potassium gates open and then positively charged potassium leaves and our cell starts to slowly depolarize. Our voltage-gated sodium gates are inactive, so sodium cannot re-enter the cell, and then we return to normal. We have a little bit of an undershoot, and then our resting potential is reestablished by the sodium-potassium pump that's bringing sodium in, taking it out. And so an action potential is really important to understand because the whole basis of the nervous system is that it's very electrically excitable. It behaves a lot like a circuit, like an electrical circuit. And the way that we kind of view action potentials is that it's a depolarization that travels along a neuron, and it has to travel along this neuron so that that neuron can then release neurotransmitters at its axon terminal and then continue that cascade of information. Miriam, did you have a question? Okay. All right, again, if you have questions, I'll also look at the chat right now. I think everyone is all set from what I can see. Okay, so now we've covered the anatomy of a neuron and what an action potential is. Let's go back to myelin. So we said that there are these support cells in the nervous system that myelinate axon, but what is myelin? What does myelination mean? I'm so glad you asked. Well, myelin is a fatty acid-based lipid substance that forms an insulating layer around our neuron. It's so important because when it insulates our nerves, it helps preserve that charge and the strength of the electrical signal. It can actually increase the conduction velocity of a nerve by over 100 times. So if you look at this diagram here, I have it, I'll show you here because it's a little bit bigger. Look at this unmyelinated axon. Something that happens when you have positive charge and just any charge traveling down is that as the space increases, the likelihood of the charge dissipating or kind of dispersing, becoming less strong is higher. It's called our length constant or our space constant. We also have a time constant. So if it takes too long for this charge to keep reaching the end of the neuron, then that charge also might dissipate. So what myelination actually does is it says, okay, the only places where this charge can actually move are at these little nodes of Ranvier. So what ends up happening is your depolarization kind of jumps from here to here to here to here to here to here, because these are the only places where you can find those channels that allow for depolarization. You can't do anything here. And so because it's jumping, it ends up being so much faster than when it's unmyelinated, and it allows for our nervous system conduction to be so much faster. And as you can see here, this is kind of the end of our action potential. So our action potential has propagated all the way down to our axons, and then we have a little zoom in here. Then that electrical signal, it's converted into a chemical one. So chemicals like neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine and GABA and glutamate, right? They're all held within these neurons. And so then these neurotransmitters, depending on the neuron, are released by that axon, and then they go and they bind onto the dendrite of another neuron, and it continues that relay of information. So this process can continue for a very long time, and it's very fast, thanks to myelin. Okay, here are the steps, because I know that might have been an overwhelming amount of information. So first, a neuron at rest, it receives the depolarizing signal, and then it reaches threshold. Once it reaches threshold, an action potential is generated. It's all or none. Once you reach threshold, it's going to be depolarized. Once you reach threshold, you're going to generate an action potential. Then that signal propagates through the neuron, thanks to myelin. And then the electrical signal reaches the end. It's converted into a chemical one. Neurotransmitters are released, and then it binds onto that receiving or target neuron. And then that prompts further cellular response. So it's kind of the basis of how neurons communicate with one another. And of course, neurons communicate with other cells in the body too, but we won't be talking about that here. So now that we know kind of how the nervous system works and more information about how it communicates with itself and the really important functions and some of the really important structures, it's important to know, well, sometimes some things might go wrong, and then it's important for us to study those and kind of learn from that. So we'll only be discussing a few diseases and disorders, but you're more than welcome to research more and kind of just learn about this on your own too. So the first disease or disorder we'll be discussing is Fragile X syndrome. So it's caused by a mutation in the FMR1 gene. Some symptoms include intellectual difficulties, behavioral challenges, etc. And some of the treatment involves speech-language therapy, physical therapy, and then also increasing social interaction. So for ADHD, there are some different environmental risk factors that might contribute to the likelihood of someone getting ADHD. It could be exposure to lead, low birth weight, etc. And some symptoms often present in childhood as inattentiveness as well as hyperactivity. It's usually diagnosed in childhood, and you must see these behavioral issues both at home and at school, and then it's treated with stimulants. Next up, we have Down syndrome. So Down syndrome is caused by a trisomy chromosome 21. So some of the symptoms include distinctive facial features, intellectual difficulties, hearing loss, and unfortunately, almost all individuals that have Down syndrome do develop early onset Alzheimer's because of a mutation in the APP gene that codes for the amyloid precursor protein that's associated with Alzheimer's. And unfortunately, there aren't any treatments, but people with Down syndromes do live long, happy lives, and we're grateful for that. Next up, we have autism. Autism is caused by some environmental factors, and there are also 12 or more associated genes where potentially mutations in these genes could affect someone's likelihood of getting autism. And in the twin studies they've conducted where they conduct studies on identical twins, if one identical twin has autism, the other twin is they have a 50% chance of having it as well. So some of the symptoms include difficulties with communicating, social interactions, sometimes repetitive behavior, but there are lots of treatments like speech language therapy, physical therapy, and education, just learning more about autism. Next up, we have some psychiatric disorders. So we have obsessive compulsive disorder. So some of these symptoms include obsessions and compulsions, like really excessive hand washing, excessive worrying about getting sick if you come into contact with a contaminated object, and also repetitive behaviors. So sometimes the term OCD is used a lot in mainstream culture to say, oh, I'm so, and I quote, OCD about cleaning my room. That's not very accurate. And we're trying to break that stigma and trying to, kind of stop people from saying that, because this is a very serious psychiatric disorder and we want to be respectful to people that have it. And then the current treatments that are offered are SSRIs. Does anybody know what an SSRI is or what it does? Feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat. Yeah, Bara.
It is a serine uptake inhibitor.
Yes, exactly. It's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. You got it. I'll also check the chat. Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Yes. So does anybody know what selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors do? It's kind of in the name, but feel free to let me know. Kenzie?
Yeah, they act as, and they're a type of drugs, so they act as antidepressants to control some of the anxiety or the diseases we're discussing today.
Yeah, exactly. So selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, what they do is they actually work at the level of the synapse. And I'll go back and go back to our picture of the synapse. You can see, so they work here. And what they do is serotonin has been linked to a deficit in some of these psychiatric conditions. So what they do is they try to keep as much serotonin in the synapse as possible to help alleviate the symptoms of these psychiatric disorders. So what they do is they prevent serotonin from being taken in or broken down, and they kind of block that from happening. So as much of these pink dots here, let's pretend that's serotonin, so as much of those pink dots can stay there as possible. So that's kind of their method of action. And another psychiatric condition is major depressive disorder. So one of those causes are genetics, environmental factors, and something known as the diathesis stress model. Does anybody know what the diathesis stress model is? That's okay, no worries. Essentially what the diathesis stress model is it's essentially, it says that it's kind of a glass half full model where your likelihood or your threshold of potentially developing a psychiatric disorder is influenced both by your genetic predisposition going into the situation plus your environmental factors. So somebody that is not genetically predisposed to developing a major depressive disorder, they're not more predisposed to developing it, but they experience a lot of stress in their environment. They might get close, but they won't actually end up developing it. But if someone is genetically predisposed and they experience environmental risk factors, then they might end up developing it. So it's kind of this, they go hand in hand model with your genes and your environment. Sarah, did you want to add anything?
Do the people who have OCD have a problem in their nervous system?
Sorry, do you mind repeating that?
For people who have OCD, they have a problem in the nervous system.
Yeah, so with all these conditions we're talking about, they do affect the nervous system or involve dysregularities in the nervous system to some capacity, for sure. Farah, did you have a question?
Yeah. What is the difference between SNRI and SSRI?
I know SSRIs are for serotonin. Do you know what SNRIs are for? It might be a different molecule that it's preventing from being
It
reuptake.
is it has serotonin and another chemical. It is typically used with ADHD, but it isn't an FDA approved drug.
Yeah, so it might be, I think, yes, it might be preventing the reuptake of another molecule similar to serotonin. So yeah, it might have a similar method of action. Okay. And some, so we talked about SSRIs, and there's also CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that has been shown to be pretty effective in people that have obsessive compulsive disorder. And then moving on to our second psychiatric disorder, or major depressive disorder, some of the classic symptoms include feeling empty or sad, loss or change drastically in appetite, irritability, problems with sleep, or a lack of interest in usual activities. It's usually accompanied by other diseases like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, or anxiety, but it isn't always. And it has similar treatment models where we have SSRIs, CBT, and DBS, or deep brain stimulation. Now, here are two neurodegenerative diseases. So we have Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's, the exact cause is still unknown, but there are a couple of things that could contribute to this, such as misfolded protein buildup or prions, like an accumulation of these beta amyloid plaques. That's definitely one of the classic biomarkers. Could be environmental factors or environmental habits, head trauma. Sometimes Alzheimer's is seen more in athletes that have traumatic brain injury. And then some of the symptoms include memory problems, difficulty concentrating, disorientation, personality changes, and then in the more moderate or severe stages, trouble recognizing family and eventually fatality. So the treatments right now include FDA-approved drugs. These help alleviate the symptoms, but unfortunately, they're not a cure. And then next up, we have Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's is caused by a loss of dopamine-producing cells in the substantia nigra. It's also potentially linked to mutations in the PARK2 and PRK2, SNCA, and LRRK2 genes and more. Some of the symptoms include a resting tremor. So what a resting tremor actually means is at rest, their hands might be shaking, or their legs might be shaking, or their arms might be shaking. It's also accompanied by slow movement and motor rigidity, poor coordination, and then motor changes. Like Alzheimer's, unfortunately, the treatments like levodopa or L-DOPA help alleviate the symptoms, but unfortunately, we haven't found a cure yet. Okay, and so to kind of talk about some research techniques, because a lot of what we've been discussing so far in the field of neuroscience and the anatomy and physiology of the nervous system is figuring out how it works, what happens when it goes wrong, and then now we might be able to figure out, okay, well, if I see something that's going wrong with my nervous system, how can I kind of attack that problem? Okay, these pictures unfortunately didn't show up, but when I upload the slides later, you'll be able to see them. But essentially, these pictures are from an undergraduate lab that I did where we recorded the resting potential of crayfish muscle fibers. And it was really cool because we got to actually see the resting membrane potential in a crayfish, which is really neat. But extracellular recording is one research technique where you can kind of see what the membrane potential is and how it changes when you might change the extracellular concentration of different ions. And so it's a really great way of testing these fundamental principles. Here are some other techniques too that are more imaging based. So you have fMRI, which is measuring brain activity via detecting changes associated with blood flow. So as you can see here, it's showing regions that are more active. We have MRI, which is creating a detailed image of the structures and the organs within your body. You don't just have to, they're not just performed on the brain, they're performed on other organs as well. We have a CT scan. Essentially what a CT scan is it compiles a series of X-ray images from multiple different angles around the body, and then they kind of compile it all together, helps diagnose tumors, checking for internal injuries, internal bleeding, and so much more. Okay, and here are some of the research techniques here. I haven't included all of the staining techniques, like how we stain different neurons or different proteins, or things like rabies viruses, where we can use that to deliver targets or kind of trace things. So what your homework is, and this is optional, it is not mandatory. I would like to repeat that again, this is optional, not mandatory, is to just do some background research on these research techniques and the stains provided and any others that you'd like, and design a simple experiment to solve this question. So a patient enters your office presenting with blurry vision and disorganized thought. You want to definitively determine whether the blurry vision is caused by potentially a tumor pressing on the optic nerve, or maybe it's a structural deficit in the occipital lobe. And then how can you go about narrowing down the potential causes of their blurry vision? Be as specific as you can. And then our most detailed and thorough response will receive a shout out at the beginning of our next session. Message me on Slack once you have your answers. So really the deadline is just a couple hours before our next session, which is on Monday. And we'll give you a shout out if your response is the most detailed and thorough. But feel free to kind of do as much research as you'd like on this. But if you don't want to, if you're not interested in it or you don't have time, it's okay. It's not mandatory. You won't be penalized if you don't do it. But if you want to kind of get that experience in designing a simple experiment in answering a research question, if that's something you're interested in, it's a great way to do that. And then if you respond to me and you provide us with an answer, we will give you some feedback too, of course. Okay, so now we've been talking about, a lot about the nervous system and diseases and disorders and research, but to kind of lighten things up a little bit, we'll talk about some optical illusions. How do they work and why do they work? Here, let me go here. All right, so why do we actually fall for optical illusions? Sometimes there's not enough information in our nervous system and our brain tries to fill in the gaps. So we're still trying to make sense of the world around us and we're making an inference that the world is supposed to make sense. So when you look at these two pictures here, do they look normal to you all? Do you think they look like just two normal faces? You can comment in the chat. Okay, yes, people are catching on really well. No, they don't look the same. There's something wrong with the eyes. Yeah. So they might look a little bit normal here, although you might be able to tell some differences. And sorry if this next slide is scary, you can flicker it a little away. But this is what they actually look like when you turn it upside down. So our brain is actually processing the other information from the other side as a normal face, when really when we turn it right side up, it's not. So it's a classic example of all these cool things we talked about, our brain processing all this information, but it's processing this information in a little bit of a shortcut. Yeah, people are noticing the differences and everything. Yes. So if you stare at this image, what do you see? What do you notice? I'll look at the chat. It's moving, yeah, but it's actually a completely still image. This isn't an animation or anything. It's a completely still image, but our brain thinks that it's moving. Yeah, exactly. I'm seeing a lot of people saying moving in the chat. You're all right.
Want to be so different, but I see it still.
You're seeing it as a still image?
Yeah.
Okay, then your brain's not tricking you. Okay, I'm seeing lots of people saying in the chat, moving, yeah.
not
No worries.
moving.
If you don't see it moving, that's okay, no worries. Sometimes it doesn't work on everybody. Yes, you're okay if you don't see it that it's moving. But try to stare at it really intensely and don't look anywhere else for a couple of seconds. Yeah, it's moving slowly.
It brings me a headache.
Yes, I was just about to mention, if it starts to give you a little bit of headache, please feel free to look away. And I'll move the slide to something else now. That's a little bit less headache inducing. Sorry about that. So this is a really cool optical illusion because there are actually two faces here. There are two ways to see it. You can see one person here. This is their chin. This is their eyelash. This is their nose. And they have their head turned away. If you look at it a little bit closer, you can actually see another face where this is their nose, this is their mouth, and this is their eye. It's a large face. So we go from a little face to a large face. And take a second to look at it. When I first looked at it, I was like, I only see one face. So take a sec, feel free to look at it. But yes, this is the second. This is a two-faced person. Someone says OMG. I'm assuming you have now seen both faces. Yes. If you only see one face, that's okay. It took me a little bit to look at it and see two faces too. Yeah, you can see it. You can see that there. Okay, so our next optical illusion is the figure ground gestalt principle. So what you can see here is either this vase looking thing, or you can actually see two people here. Does everybody see both? Yeah. Candle holder. Okay.
It's a mafia.
Pardon?
Mafia people.
Yeah, there's two people. Yeah, see it as a vase, candle holder, some kind of holding object. Exactly. Yeah, everyone's seeing two faces, two people. Awesome. Kenzie, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
Yeah, are those cases like the one when we can see a word that has an extra like letter, but our brain automatically recorrect it so that we can read it correctly?
Yes, that's a great example to bring up. So sometimes the way these things work is that you'll see a prompt that says the and the twice, but your brain won't notice that the word the was actually repeated twice until you go back and someone's told you, listen, the word the has been repeated twice. So that's just another way of our brain trying to move quickly and process things as speedily as possible. So you just really overlook it. Another thing is there's another concept where our brains read the first part of a word and the last part, but the middle part isn't as important. And someone released like a prompt or a sentence or something where the middle parts of the words didn't make any sense, but the first letters and the last letters did make sense, and people were able to read it just fine, which kind of supports that principle. Bara?
Yeah. Does people with dyslexia have more problem with this stuff?
More problem with what?
People with dyslexia, do they have more problem with those tricking stuff?
I'm not sure about that. What we know about dyslexia is that there's more difficulties with like reading comprehension or like receiving reading and like written languages, but unsure about this.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. That could be a great research question if you want to look into that. Okay, this one is one of my favorites because I still don't believe it, but this gray here and this gray here, they're actually both the same color. It is the same gray here. Nothing is darker and nothing is lighter. I still don't believe it, but it is actually true.
Maybe because of the shadow of the cylinder?
I would think that it would be because of the shadow, right? That's how I perceived it at first, but it's actually, there's no shadow there. The shadow doesn't exist. Our brains think that there's a shadow there, but it's actually not. The shadow is not there. There's no shadow.
So what is that dark color?
Because our brains are tricking us into thinking that there is a shadow when there's not. The cylinder is a different color. You can see here it's like whitish, and then here it's dark green. That might be what's tricking us into thinking that there's a shadow, but this gray and this gray, all this gray, it's all the same. A little bit trippy. Yeah.
Isn't that because we are used to do that in real life?
Exactly. It's because our brains have processed so much information in our real lives where shadows are darker behind people or objects that when we see this, we go, oh, but the lighting looks like that must be a shadow. Okay, I think that was the last optical illusion I had for everyone, but I did want to talk about brain.
Those also remind me of the example where the photo contains a bunch of pencils and they want me to count them, and from the bottom, the number of the pencils is different from the upper part.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one specifically, but I'm sure it operates on the same principle. Okay, so Brandy, if you're interested in neuroscience or you think you might be interested, you want to kind of test it out, something that I really encourage students to do is Brain Bee. It's a neuroscience competition, and the lovely thing about it is it's hosted in every single state and every single country in the world, to my knowledge. It's usually in February. It's every year. It's open to all high school students. So if you're in high school and you want to participate in Brain Bee, I would highly encourage it. I did Brain Bee in high school. I found the experience to be incredibly rewarding, and you don't need any prior experience in neuroscience. You go into it having absolutely So how do you actually participate? Well, you can search for a Brain Bee near you and then register when available. Registration probably won't be open until maybe the September or so, because it's not till next February. You can even make a club at your own school to prep. And what you do is you study this brain facts book that's available to the public. Some of the information that I used for for today's session came from the brain facts book and from when I studied for Brain B. You study neuroanatomy, you study patient diagnoses over the span of 2 to 3 months or longer or shorter, whatever works for you. And then you go and you compete, and they have awards for people that place in the top 10 or the top 5 or the top 3. It depends on your region. So in the bottom right is a picture of when I did Brain B in 2020, and it was just really a worthwhile experience. So if you ever have any questions about Brain B, where can I find one near me? Do you need study tips? I'm really more than happy to always answer questions. I'd love to mentor a few people this year in Brain B that are looking to participate, because I know it might be difficult because unfortunately Brain B is not as well known throughout every single high school. It's not as common. So we want to get more people interested in neuroscience and attending these things. So if you want to do it, please let me know and I would be so happy to help you. They also have the national and international Brain B. So I competed within my state, which is Massachusetts. And so I competed for the opportunity to represent Massachusetts. And then whoever won competed for the opportunity to represent the United States. And then whoever represents the United States competes against everybody else from all over different countries. So you come represent your country in the international Brain B, and it's a couple-day competition, and it's really wonderful from what I've heard.
I have a question.
Is it related to Brain B?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Is that competition is online or offline?
That's a great question. So the last couple of years, prior to this one, it was online due to COVID, but this year it was in person, I believe, for most states and countries. It might be that it was online for some people, but where I live, it was in person.
Okay. Does it have a place in Egypt or this region?
I believe so. I can't say for 100% sure, but I'll look into it and confirm so I don't give you the wrong information.
Okay. I'm asking for details, please. More details. If there is a website that I can read more about it.
Yes.
I'm interested in this competition.
Perfect. Yes. So if you ever want more details, just message me on Slack. I'll make an announcement too, and if enough people are interested. Oh, perfect. People are saying in the chat that they participated in Brain B in Egypt last year. That's so wonderful. It makes me so happy that students are interested in participating in Brain B. So yes, I'm so glad.
It's available in Egypt. I can answer him.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. Yeah,
Well,
and
can you recommend some sources to study for this competition?
Yeah, so the nice thing about this competition is all of your study materials come from this book, this Brain Facts 2018 book. So I would recommend studying that and reading the older versions of the book too, because sometimes those concepts pop up. So reading that book, it is open access, available online. You can download it right now. It's free. And then, studying neuroanatomy and patient diagnoses. But if you want more in-depth study tips, I'd be happy to send you them later.
Okay, if I finish this book, I will be ready to join this competition and get a high score.
There are a couple of different factors that contribute to potentially getting a high score. For me, what I did was I studied that book really intensely. Like I knew almost every word on every single page in the book, and I studied my neuroanatomy really comprehensively, and I practiced diagnosing patients. And I practiced all this stuff over the course of a couple months until I was really, really comfortable with it. And then I competed.
Okay, thanks.
Can I have a question?
So actually for right now, I'm going to pause on the questions, but you can ask me questions after the session that are related to Brain B. I just have noticed that we are pretty much at time for the session, and I want to make sure that you can all go and enjoy your weekends because it's Friday. I hope Friday where I am, hopefully it's Friday where you are too. But we didn't get to the cardiology, anatomy and physiology section today. So what I'll do is I'll share these slides and you can read over the cardiology stuff. And then Ahmad presented the workshop on this last year for the anatomy and physiology of the cardiovascular system. So if you want to watch his session from last year, you can do that too. Or if you prefer that we cover it live, maybe we can do an extra session next week and I can cover the content that we didn't get to today. But I think that was all the information I had to share. I will definitely stick around after the session is done. If you have more questions about Brain Bee, I'd be so happy to chat with all of you. But for right now, let me send out our last attendance poll. And then you are all free to go after you answer this if you don't have any more questions. But again, if you have questions about the program or about Brain Bee, just hang tight for 1 sec and I will be right back to answer them. You can raise your hands now too if you want. I'll just call on you in a second. Okay, this is also just a for fun question. Feel free to answer it and then you are welcome to head out. All right, so if you don't have